It all came to me as I was reading through the prompts of the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge for this year. What if I am not just a romance girly? The idea came because one of the prompts was to read a book in a genre that you would usually avoid. So that meant for me basically anything that wasn't a romance. And that gave me an idea. Why don't I try literally every other genre that I can get my hands on for this year and figure out if my reading tastes are a little bit broader than romance girly? This does come with a disclaimer that there are some genres other than romance that I have read, that I have loved, that I go back to. And these are going to come on this list because I want to do it as a kind of a ranking system. Which, outside of romance, are my favorite genres. So, as best as I can, until the end of the year, when you are going to see this video, this is January the 10th. You are not going to see this until like mid to late December. But we're going to carry out a wee experiment. We're going to see every month until December. I'm going to try and pick up a book in a genre that I don't generally reach for. And let's see where we lie in the scale. January, I think I'm going to start a little bit simple and I'm going to go for historical fiction. That is something that I have read a lot. That is something that I know that I enjoy. And it's also a book that I need to read for book club. So that does just fit into it a little bit too simply. I am going to read Hello Beautiful by Anne Napolitano, I believe that is correct. I've heard comparisons to this and Little Women, which is one of my favorite classics of all time. This is the book that I voted for the book club. The other one on the list was The Woman in Me by Britney Spears, and I'd already read that. I didn't really want to go in and discuss it because it can be a little bit bleak and depressing, but I'm willing to give this one a try. So let's see where on the scale does historical fiction lie. I don't even remember if you saw me with a haircut, but I've gotten a haircut. I am 89 pages, so I'm about a quarter of the way through Hello Beautiful. This time next week, book club will be over, so I will have given my thoughts. But as of now, this is not going as well as I had hoped it would go. This is quite a strange book. I had the idea that this was set a lot earlier than it actually is. I thought that this would be set in something like the 1850s to 1890s. It's not. Most of the chapters are set in like the 1980s that I have read from so far. And I feel like this disconnect is impacting my enjoyment of this book. But it also feels like it's written as if it were set in that time. There are social mores that would have been more accepted in the 1890s than in the 1980s. There are ways of thinking that were more common in the 1890s than the 1980s. It's just taken me out of it a little bit. I'm not also wholly in love with some of the characters. I am particularly not fond of the girl's mother. I have no real love for her in my heart. I'm sure she's a lovely person, but there's a couple of situations that she has been in or put her family in that, given her own personal history, I didn't think she would put her own family into this. It does mean that the video is starting out on a bit of a bum note because historical fiction was one of my kind of bank genres. It was one that I knew I was going to get on okay with. It was one that I knew would kind of score pretty high because of my personal opinions about it. And don't get me wrong, this will still score pretty high in the overall genres. It's just that I don't think this is the best representation of a historical fiction that I could have found. But we'll keep going. Because we have to. Because it's for book club. I'm not going to finish this book. I know it's for book club. I don't care that it's for book club. Historical fiction did not go well. And that is upsetting to me because that was one of the banks. I know that I said this previously, but that was one of the bank genres. It was one that I knew I was going to get along well with. So the fact that I have started this video on such a dud is not really giving me the best confidence. But I'm going to go on. February is coming in a couple of days. It's the 20th of January. So the fact that it took me already 10 days to get to page 104 should tell you what my thoughts about this book were, but they were not very pleasant. I think it was just written for the wrong time. It was written like it was set in like 1940, 1950. It was actually set in 1980, 1990. So I have read a super summary of what happens, and that is exciting. That would have been fun to find out. It's just that the book was so badly written that I don't care to get there. February is approaching. and I am going to have a little thought as to what I want to do for the next genre tryout. I've got a couple of ideas. It's obviously not going to be a romance, even though February is the month of romance. But let's see what we do. There's only a half an hour left in the day, but it is still February 1st. For February, I'm going down the dark academia road. And there are a couple of reasons as to why this one was the one that I chose to go for. Number one, it is one of the host favorites for the Battle of the Girl Bands readathon. It's Brittany's favorite, and I am on Team Cheetah Girls, so that's going to get extra points. Reason the second is that myself and some of my friends, Shannon, and Charlotte, are going to read this broken down across the month. So I think that is going to be a very accessible way for me to actually get this read and to understand this and to read it. And to discuss it with other people as well is going to be a really good idea. So no more faffing around. Dark Academia, we're going for Babel. I, like you, I'm surprised that this book is in my possession, but it is. As I said, we're reading this across the entire month of February. We've broken it down to about a chapter a day until you get to the weekend where you're trying to get 3 chapters done across the 2 days. And I think it could be doable. I know that this is a kind of a historical fiction meets dark academia, so I think that that will be okay. And it also has quite a lot to do with languages, with linguistics, with I think the main plot of it focuses around a language learning society or like a translation society. And I love a language. I absolutely love languages. I am fluent in 3 languages. I am pigeon speaking in other specific languages. I think this is one that is going to be accessible for me in that reason. I don't know how often I'm going to be able to update you with this, purely because of what our reading system is going to be like, but I will come back in here as much as I can. I didn't give you any updates for the midway point or the 3/4 of the way or anything like that because it took me so long to figure out how I feel about Babel, however you want to pronounce it. And I finished it last night. And I really do not know how I feel about it. I feel like I am not intelligent enough for this book. There are aspects to it that I really, really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the language, the translation, the linguistics, all of that. I really, really loved that part of this book. Then there were aspects of it that I didn't enjoy. I didn't enjoy the colonialism. I didn't enjoy the racism. I didn't enjoy the subterfuge that happened between some of the characters. It's definitely one that I think I need to sit with for a little while. It's definitely one that I think I need to listen to a couple of podcasts, read a couple of other people's reviews about it, maybe talk to the other girls in the group about how they were feeling about it. I think right now I'm sitting at about a 3.5 star rating, which feels correct for the amount of enjoyment that I got out of it, the amount of intrigue that I got out of it. I think that the stop-start situation that we have with this book, where we would just read a chapter a day, it took me out of the story too much. There were days that I would just keep going. There were days that I would read maybe 4 or 5 chapters on the go, and that is when I was really starting to get into the story. I was really starting to enjoy it. I was actually engaged in it. But then there were other days where I did just read the 1 chapter that we were supposed to, and I didn't enjoy it as much. I wonder if it's one that if I do go back to it, and if I do reread it again, if I just go as much of it in one chunk as I can, maybe I'll feel a little different about it. But I think right now this is kind of middle of the road. And if we're talking about a ranking of the genres so far, even though I didn't finish the historical fiction book, I still think we're putting the historical fiction book above this one, mainly because of how much I enjoyed the overall genre of it, the overall aspects of it. Whereas here, I wasn't so engaged. It is March. And March always means Irish books, Irish authors, Irish stories. So I'm going to lean into that, and I'm going to go with some of the oldest forms of storytelling that you have. Mythology. I am going for an Irish mythological retelling that I have really, really tried to get into. This is, I think, my 2nd or 3rd attempt at reading Savage Her Reply by Deirdre Sullivan, and I really hope that this is the one that will stick. I know that I love Deirdre's writing because I have read a couple of other books by her before. I've read a couple of her contemporary books, and I know that she has just brought out an adult book last year or the year before, but she is mainly a children's and YA author. A big reason that I want to read Savage Her Reply, and it's such a silly reason, but it tells the story of Aoife, not just me. Aoife's features in the mythology of the children of Lear, who are four children of the king, Lear, who are cursed by Aoife, their stepmother, to turn into swans for 900 years. They have to spend 300 years on 3 different lakes across Ireland. And I am so interested to read this because it is Aoife's origin story. It's kind of like her villain origin story as well. I'm kind of interested to see how that's going to be portrayed. But I'm really going to give it a try this time. It's quite warm today. It's going to be 17 degrees for the first time since maybe September. So I've had my window open and there's been a little bit of commotion outside all morning. If you hear some of the commotion, I apologize profusely. I am about 25% of the way through Savage Her Reply, and it's phenomenal. It's so well written, but I knew that I would expect this. I knew to expect this already from Deirdre Sullivan's work because I've read a lot of her contemporary works. I have read one of the Prim and Proper books, which is like a little YA series. I have read Needlework, which is another YA book about a young girl who wants to be a tattoo artist. And I've also read something that's another way out of my roadhouse, and that is Perfectly Preventable Deaths. It's another YA book, and it's more so kind of a fantasy book, and I loved the writing style of all of those. So I knew that I would be in safe hands with the writing style, but I was a little bit worried and a little bit concerned about the genre. I was just a little bit concerned that it wasn't something that I'd reach for a lot. It wasn't something that I enjoyed reading, because I've tried A Song of Achilles and I didn't really enjoy it. And I've tried Ariadne and I didn't really enjoy it. So I thought maybe I'm just not a mythology girl. It turns out I am a mythology girly if the mythology is my own culture. But anyway, as I knew, and as I told you going in, this is the story of Aoife, who is married off to Lear, one of the High Kings of Ireland. And this happens after the death of Aoife's sister. I'm pretty sure her name is Alva. Aoife's got 2 sisters, and one of them is named Alva for sure, and I cannot remember what the other sister's name. I think it's Ava. Her sister has died in childbirth while giving birth to her and Lear's second set of twins within about maybe 4 or 5 years. And Lear is like, this is too many children for me to take care of. I only have 2 hands and now I have 4 kids. So I need somebody else to be here and to help me to raise the family, basically. So he marries Alva's sister Aoife, who I think in the book is in her teens. She's not particularly super old. Something that has struck me so much in this book. I thought, and the mythology presented, that a lot of the resentment in Aoife was towards Lear. That he was so much older than her when she got married to him, and that he had basically taken away some of her childhood and some of her innocence, and you see him taking away a lot of her innocence in this book. But the vibe that I'm getting here is actually that Aoife has a little bit of resentment towards the kids. And that she has a little bit of resentment towards them for killing her sister, basically. And I'm so intrigued to see if that's the path that we're going to go down. I'm really intrigued to see how this book is going to continue. I'm so invested in this book. I really want my workday to be finished so that I can get reading again. I'm so invested in it, more so than I think I expected to be. I just like mythology if it's based around my own culture. I am done with Savage Her Reply. I've actually finished it about a week ago, but I just wanted to sit on my thoughts for this vlog for a little bit. It was such a phenomenal book. I genuinely had such a great time with this, and a good time that I wasn't expecting to have. I know I said a couple of times that mythology was really one of the ones on this list that I was a little bit concerned about, and it was one that I was really worried about, because I have read a couple of mythology books that I didn't enjoy. But I think it's because it was a mythology that I was so used to. It was a story that I was really familiar with. It was characters that I have known from growing up in Ireland. I think that might have heavily influenced just how much I was enjoying it. I was a little worried about where the story was going to go, because Aoife turns the children into swans about a third of the way through the book. And I was a little bit worried about what was the next 66% going to be filled up with, But it turns out that it was so engaging and so gripping. It really involved me in the story in a way that I wasn't particularly expecting it to be. It went through the entire 900 years of the children of Lear being swans. Their 300 years on Loch Derry-na-Va, their 300 years in the Straits of Moyle, and then their final 300 years, and when they are converted to Christianity and when they pass away. At the back of the book, there is also a little glossary of all of the Irish terms that are used in this book, and there's quite a few of them. There are the explanations for them, there are the pronunciations for them, which I am a fluent Irish speaker, but I didn't need it. But I know that there's going to be people out there who haven't got a whole lot of experience with the Irish language or with Irish culture, and who are really going to appreciate something like that. And I'm always really glad to see when people bring you, the reader, into their culture. If we're going to talk about the ranking, and if we're going to talk about the genres that I've already read from, I have a feeling that this is going to go into second place as of now. It is definitely after historical fiction, but it is also definitely ahead of dark academia. April is fast approaching. Today's the 21st of March. I have got a couple of days to think about where I want to go with the April book and the April genre that I want to do. I've got a couple of ideas in mind. I just need to kind of narrow them down to what I really want to do. But it is definitely also going to be something that's not in my roadhouse. It is April the 5th, and I think I've made my choice. I had pretty much the entire week to think about where I wanted to go, because there were a couple of genres that were kind of playing around in my head, but I think I've made my decision and I've stuck to it. And I'm going to blame Brie for Four Paws in a Book for this one, because she did a video recently about like the books that were on her shelf that were really highly rated on Goodreads that she actually stood by and that she would actually recommend to people. And one of them was a sci-fi book. It was The Darkness Beneath Us or The Darkness Between Us, and I don't remember the author's name. But it was a sci-fi book. She said it was a male-male romance, and I am genuinely intrigued by it. I come with a tiny little caveat that I have read a sci-fi adjacent book before. I have read and I have really, really enjoyed The Loneliest Girl in the Universe by Lauren James. I genuinely loved that more than I thought that I would. I went into it with very low expectations because it was sci-fi heavy, because it was based on a spaceship that was being taken away from Earth, which was pretty much imploding, to start life on a brand new planet. And I think that is a similar situation as to what is going to be happening in The Darkness Between Us. So I am intrigued and I am hopeful. And let's just see if I have a good time with it. Let's just see what kind of a time I have with this one. I've come to my second DNF of the project. There was just nothing about this book that I felt was making me really interested in it. And I did get to the big reveal. So I do know what the big thing that happens in this book is. But I never really felt like I was reaching for it. And it took me so long after you saw me making my decision on what I was going to read. I think I did that on like the 30th, 31st of March. This is the 22nd of April. And I only started that book maybe like a couple of days ago and then still haven't gotten to finish it. It's never really a good sign if I am not actively reaching for a book. It's not something that I'm going to want to read. It's not something that I actively look for. So I think this is another DNF. It's possible that sci-fi just isn't working for me. There are a couple of sci-fi books that I've enjoyed. Like I said, I really liked The Loneliest Girl in the Universe. And I also really liked 11/22/63. That sci-fi element there. But this one just didn't work for me. If we're talking about where this is going to go in the ranking for the grand scheme of things, we're looking at this one definitely being after dark academia. We're looking at this one definitely being after historical fiction. I think at the moment, this one is my least favorite genre so far. I don't really know where I'm going to go for May. I don't have any ideas. I have got an idea for another couple of months' time, but May is very much up in the air. So I'm going to see, when I get closer to the end of April, I'm going to see where I want to go with what genre I'm going to do for May. Let's see if that brings me back up on the upswing. He can't be trusted not to go kamikaze, so he lives on the couch now. It's May. Something like May the 15th or 16th. It's so late into the day for this. But I had to really think about what I wanted to do for May. Also, I have this massive spot that we're just not going to address or talk about. I decided on fantasy. I don't know what it was that brought me to decide that May was going to be fantasy month. I just felt like I really needed to stretch it out. I have been kind of stretching it out, not so much in the last couple of months, but I felt like now I really needed to kind of put myself into gear. It also means that I've been kind of lying to people.
because I said for such a long time, and in 2 videos that I have put up maybe 2-3 weeks ago, one within a week of the other, I am not going to read this book. You saw me on camera saying, this is not a book that I would read. This is not a book that I'm going to go for. This is not a book that I'm going to pick up. I picked it up. I went to the library, they had it on the shelf, and I said, you know what? It has a historical element to it. So I think that that's going to be a slight little draw in. I will give the disclaimer that I have read the Kindle sample of this about 4 years ago by this stage. I don't remember actually when this book came out, but it was very, very close to the time that it did. So if this was like 2020, so maybe about 3 years ago by that stage, because I think it was like the March or the April of the following year. I read the sample of it, I wasn't so enamored. But I don't actually remember where in the book this sample let off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give it a try. I will go into it. I will try and clear my brain of all of the thoughts that I have had from it before, and I will just give it a try. Let's see how we get on. I was full on sure that I have done this, but I cannot find the footage anywhere. So instead of having like a halfway through or a third of the way through, you're going to have a full on what I thought of Addie LaRue. I've gotten to the end of it. I think it's a 3-star. Look, I get it. I understand what it is that people really love about this book. I understand that they love the well-written prose. I understand that they love the kind of getting from this part of her life to this part of her life and figuring out the connection between herself and Henry. But oh my good God, nothing happens. I had kind of pictured this as Forrest Gump, but a longer stretch of time. Because it starts out in the 1700s and then you go all the way up to 2014 or so. So I was of the impression that Addie would be turning up at all of these events. Like she'd be there during the Vietnam War, or she would be there during the Irish famine, or she would be there at things that impacted the world. And there's just these tiny little, oh, I was in Dublin and I was in Budapest and I was in London. How did you get there? Nobody can remember who this woman is. How is she traveling across the world? How is she buying a plane ticket? How is she getting on a boat? Nobody can remember her the second that they turn their back from her. I also thought that it was really interesting to see how the connection between her and Henry had gotten there. I thought it was really interesting to see them getting along with each other, figuring each other's kind of things out. I just thought that there were a couple of holes that weren't filled in for me. I'm going to take the fantastical side of this because obviously there is an element of historical fiction that I would have really enjoyed, and I'm just going to take the fantastical side of this when I am telling you where it's going in the ranking. I enjoyed this more than I did The Darkness Outside, and I enjoyed this more than I did Babel, but I didn't love this as much as I did Saboteur Reply, so it's going pretty much slap bang in the middle. It is the third of 5 at the moment, but June is on its way, and I have got no idea what the book that I'm going to read for the genre that I've picked out is, but if you know what I was doing in June, you know what genre I've picked. It's June. I haven't picked my book yet. I know, I'll come back to that. But the prompt for Buenos Aires for the Amazing Readathon was to read a book that had a dual POV. Obviously, I know Addie LaRue will count for that. Obviously, I can't read it because I put it down like 3 days ago. But the amount of times that I've had to tell people, I've never read Addie LaRue, I'm sorry, I don't know if that's POV, dual POV or not. Oh, Addie LaRue is one of the books that I'm never going to read. And all the time in the back of my mind, you conniving little fox. I've made my choice for June. I am not going to try and wait to see if this is going to fit into a prompt. I'm just going to submit it as a sightseeing book, and I'm going to see how I get along with it first. It's one that's been on my shelf for a while. It's one that intimidates me a little bit because I know that it has quite a lot of mathematics in it. Let's see how we go. I'm going to pick up The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. Got this as a gift from Emma from Drinking by My Shelf a couple of years ago before my birthday. And I know that this is about a housekeeper who comes to the professor's home every single day, and he only has a memory span of about 80 minutes. So every time she comes into the room, she has to reintroduce herself. But because she's a single mother, she brings her young son with her. I think he's like 8, 9, 10 years old. And he and the professor delve into this big world of mathematics and mathematical equations because that's what he used to teach. And it's kind of keeping his brain taking over and it's keeping his brain alive. I know that that is something that is very common for people who suffer from dementia or from Alzheimer's. If you introduce them to a topic that they knew when they were younger and something that's super familiar with them, it can kind of alleviate the symptoms and it can kind of trigger old memories coming back for them. I think that's the situation we're going to be going into. Let's see how I get along with it.
I am back in my own home. It is the 9th of July. I have been in Ireland for a lot of the last couple of days, but I brought the book with me and I actually read it all in its entirety on the 30th of June. So it does still count as June's book. And I had a different time with this than I think I was expecting to. It's so beautifully written. The book is absolutely stunning, but there's a lot of mathematics in it. And I am not a numbers girly. I am absolutely not the person that you come to if you want to have something counted. So that did hamper it a little tiny bit, but it was so beautifully written, and there was such a stunning relationship between the professor and Root, who is the housekeeper's son. It's the nickname that he gives to him because Root's head is completely flat and it looks like the square root symbol. I loved this book. I really enjoyed this. I think I enjoyed it more than I was expecting to because I knew it would be quite heavy on the mathematics, and the mathematics did take away from it just a little bit for me, but I still had a really good time with it because it was so well written. Also, bonus is that it was set in 1992, which is the year that I was born. It was set before I was born, but it was really nice to read a book where you're like, oh, I have that little close connection to this. I loved this. I'm not sure if Yoko Agawa has anything else that she's written, but if she does, I'm definitely going to go and check it out. So let's talk rankings. We're halfway through the year, so we've got the first row completely filled out. And for literary fiction, I am putting this into third place. It's going in between mythology and fantasy. It is a pretty solid third place at the moment, and I am quite happy with how this is looking right now. I'm pretty happy with the system that I've got, pretty happy with the ranking that we have. And now we move on to July. July is going to be crime. It just felt like I needed something a little bit crimey. I needed something a little bit darker. But I needed to keep the darker, like the really darker ones, until September, October kind of time. The added challenge here for myself is that I'm focusing mainly on NetGalley books for July. I want to get my NetGalley total a little bit closer to 90% than it is right now. I think somewhere around the 84, 85 is where I am right now. I want to get that a little bit healthier looking. And I have got a couple of crime books on my NetGalley. I know that I have got Someone in the Attic by Andrea Mara. I have got In the Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. I think that's more of a thriller than a crime, though. I've got Guilty by Definition by Susie Dent. I just got that a couple of days ago, actually, while I was still in Ireland. I have a couple of options that I'm going to go for, but I'm going to read through the list again and I'm going to see where I go. So I made an entire error there. July is not crime. Crime is coming a little bit later in the year, a little bit later in this vlog. July is mystery. That makes this so much easier. A lot of books that I think are crime books are actually mystery books. And I have a couple of books that could fit in here really, really well. Some of them are physical books that I have gotten a arc of. Some of them are going to be NetGalley books. But I think I have got one that is a NetGalley book and that is a physical book on my TBR. Let me go and check. I took my luck. I don't have the book that I was thinking of on my NetGalley, so that does kind of limit me a little bit here because, as I said, July is going to be all about NetGalley. However, I have got a couple of other books on the shelf that are definitely contenders here, and I'm torn between two. I have A Beginner's Guide to Breaking and Entering by Andrew Hunter Murray, who is one of the QI elves. QI is a panel show that is based in the UK, and you have to kind of give interesting answers that are still correct. And then I have Guilty by Definition by Susie Dent. Susie Dent is a lexicographer, so she compiles dictionaries as a living, but she is also the resident lexicographer on Countdown, which is a daytime TV show in the UK where you are made to solve conundrums. You get a list of 9 letters and you've got to make the longest word that you can from those 9 letters. There's also a mathematics round. I clearly don't do very well at that. I enjoy the comedy version of this that is put on sometimes in the evenings, like 3 or 4 times a year. I think Susie Dent's book is calling to me just that little bit more, even though I've had Breaking and Entering for much longer. I did start some of it. I think it was over Easter when I was just in a little bit of a tiny reading slump, and I was doing a couple of try chapters, and it was fun, it was entertaining, but I feel like I need to go with the Susie Dent one. I'm also going to be very transparent with you. Mysteries, thrillers, all of that are another kind of safe bank genre. They're ones that I've already read from, they're ones that I know I'm going to enjoy, they're ones that I have enjoyed in the past. So I am kind of expecting these ones to go up high on the listing. But let's see when we finish the book where they actually find it. This has gone in no way successfully because I DNF'd this. I really hoped for it. I had really high hopes for this one, but I am not intelligent enough for this book. This is the kind of thing that you spend a couple of minutes reading it and then you have to go and get a dictionary to look up what a word means. Or there's some phrase that hasn't been used in years and years and years, and you have to go and check what does that mean. There was a sentence in this book that I just felt wasn't working. It didn't fit because it's not the dialogue that people would usually say. So all of the dialogue in this book felt really clunky, felt really unnatural. I'm going to read you what that dialogue was because it felt really unnatural. I made a note of it in my reading journal. Aren't we here to conjobble after all? Nobody says words like that. And it just didn't feel natural. It didn't feel like a conversation that people in their 30s would have. And I know that because I am in my 30s. I don't know if it is the wrong book at the wrong time. I don't know if it is a book that just needed a little bit more work, but it just didn't work for me. So I'm going to be leaving Mysteries right down at the bottom of the pile. I'm pretty sure that the mystery itself would have been really interesting. It was a really interesting part of it. It's just that the writing didn't work for me. It didn't drag me. It didn't drag me in. And that's something that you really needed to do if you're gonna keep people invested in the mystery. For August, we're not going 100 million miles away from this. So hopefully, August, we're going to get a better book, we're going to get a better vibe, and it's actually going to be something that I finish. We are 2 days away from the start of August, but I have picked the genre for this month. I said at the end of the last clip that it wasn't going to be 100 miles away from what I had been doing in July, and that I was hopeful that this one was going to go better. So July was mysteries, August is thrillers. I just felt like I wanted something a little bit atmospheric. I wanted something that was a little bit kind of chilling because August in Berlin is usually hot. And when I say hot, I mean we're getting like 36 in the middle of next week. So I need something that's going to chill me to my bones. Enter Emma Disappeared by Andrew Hughes. This is, I think, his debut novel. And it is about a young girl called Emma who goes to Trinity College in Dublin and who disappears one night while she is out with a friend of hers. All of the eyes then turn to Emma's boyfriend, Tom, who has actually disappeared throughout the course of the investigation. And there is a whole heap of other people who are being brought in for questioning and who are general suspects for this whole thing. I'm intrigued to see where this is going to go. I'm really invested in how this is going to go. Also, I have accidentally matched my nails to the cover of this book, so I feel like this is the best omen we have. Now, we've had up and downs in the last couple of months. Fantasy was somehow a good one. Literary fiction was a kind of an up and down. Mysteries did not work for me at all, but I think that was more so the books that I had picked and not the genres themselves. Let's see how thrillers go. I'm silently hopeful that we're going to get back on track with this one. Different angle for once. Look at her go. I am about halfway through Emma Disappeared. I don't know how I feel about this book, but I don't think it's positive. This is definitely written wrong. Let me explain what I mean. The character in this book, James, he's the main character that we're following, and he is obsessed with the disappearance of Emma Hart, who went missing at the end of November, a couple of days before the main action of this book takes place. He keeps going into work and looking up what had happened to her and the news reports about it, and it's too much. He's really falling down rabbit holes, first of all, but second problem that I have with this, he is written as the wrong age. In this book, he is canonically 24 years old. It says it it says that Emma Hart, who disappeared, is 24 years old. That's the same age as me. But James doesn't read as a 24-year-old. And I know this because I have been 24 years old. And that wasn't 100 years ago, but it also wasn't yesterday. But I do know how 24-year-olds act and speak and think. And this man is not acting or speaking or thinking like a 24-year-old would. He's more so reading to me like a 35-year-old. So he's about 10 years older than what he actually should be. He's a little bit too advanced in his career for a 24-year-old. First problem. He's got an older brother who is 12 years older than he is, so that puts him at 36. But his older brother has like an 18-year-old, 19-year-old child and has been married for about 3 years before the child came along. My mathematics puts him at 16 years old when he got married. Now, in Ireland, which is where this book is set, marriage at 16 is not legal. You need to have parental permission to get married at the age of 16. How's the thriller going? Because that's the main thing that we're going to be focusing on for this review. I am confused by the thriller. I'm actually confused about how Emma Hart went missing and why there's so much of an attention on her. There's not a whole lot of attention on her boyfriend, who has also gone missing. Since Emma's disappearance, he has also been declared missing. And it's just confusing. I'm not super vibing with this as much as I had hoped that I would. I'm not really that invested in this. I am going to keep going with it because I kind of just want to know what's going to happen. But this book isn't giving me what I wanted to be given. I got a lot further into this book than I did Guilty by Definition last month. I got about 250 pages in, and that's when I DNF'd it. There were a couple of things across this book that I didn't enjoy, but there was so much getting towards the end of it that I just kept thinking, why am I still here? Why am I still reading this? Then we got to a point where one of the characters said, oh, I can pretend to be a non-binary person for a laugh. And that is when I gave up on this book. It wasn't any of the other things that had happened. It wasn't anything else. It was that point that got to me, breaking point. But like I said, there were a couple of things that I really just didn't enjoy with it. One is that James was written so out of his age range that it just didn't make sense to me. But as I got further into the book, I kind of realized if this is supposed to be a thriller, why aren't we trying to solve the mystery? If this was supposed to be a thriller, we were supposed to be getting James is looking into all of these things that are happening and trying to figure out where this person has gone or why this person is missing in the first place. We actually didn't get any of that. Quite a lot of this book was James establishing a new relationship. He had just recently broken up with his girlfriend who wanted to go traveling. He wasn't so keen on it, so they decided to just split and let her do her thing, which is fair. I think that that is a good and solid reason to break up with somebody. It just didn't work for me. I felt like we should have been more concentrating on this whole mystery that has been going on for the entire book of why this person is missing and how this person is involved in it, if this person is involved with it at all. So sadly to say, thrillers, one of my bank genres, because of the book that I read, is going to be let down. It is going to be down at the bottom of the pile. It is going to go above mystery because, as I said, I did get a bit further into the book and I did know a little bit about the mystery that was happening in here. I did know a little bit about the things that were supposed to be happening and supposed to be solved. So it is going to go above mystery. Is it going to go above sci-fi? That's the second question. I think yes. Once again, only because I've gotten further into this book than I did The Darkness Outside Us. So at present, it is sitting third from the bottom. That is not where I expected it to be. I expected it minimum third from the top. So now that August is done and dealt with, we need to go on to September. September felt like back to school time. So you can kind of imagine where I'm going to go with this genre for September. It's just that I have no clue what the book I'm going to read is. But I'll let you know. It's September. And in my head, if we're talking September, we're talking about classical literature. So we're thinking things like Dickens, we're thinking things like Austen, we're thinking things like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. There are a couple of things that are in my head. There's a couple that I've really wanted to read for a really long time. One of the candidates was Pride and Prejudice. This is one that I have been so typical of non-classical readers. I have said
that I have read Pride and Prejudice. And what I've actually done is read the Wikipedia synopsis of the film. And I know that that's not exactly the same thing. I really need to get this one done, but I do not think that I have the time in the rest of September with what I need to do, what I need to read, what I have got outside of reading. I don't think I have the time to get this done. So I might put this one on the back burner and just read it at another time in my own pace. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go for a children's classic. September always feels like kind of back to school time for me, even though I have been out of education for almost 10 years by this stage. It just feels like going back to school, getting your books out and like studying them and learning about them and making notes about them. And that's something that I still do to this day, in that I have a reading journal and I keep track of what I've been reading and my thoughts about them. So I feel like September had to be a classics month. For that reason, I have once again got two big ones on my mind. I've got one that I can access as an audiobook, and I've got one that I can access as an ebook. The ebook is Heidi by Joanna Spiri, which is set in Switzerland. It's by a Swiss author. It is about Heidi, who's a very young child, I think like 6 or 7, and she's sent to live with her father in the Swiss Alps and live on his goat farm. Then there is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. This is, depending on what way you look at it, either the first or the second book of the Chronicles of Narnia series. I have seen the film. Saw it when it came out in the cinema in 2005 or 6, I want to say. I know that I had just barely started secondary school by then, but I've never actually read the book. I have read The Magician's Nephew. I kind of liked it. It was fine. Let's see how I'm going to get along with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because I know the story. It's kind of somewhere buried in my head from having seen it so long ago. Let's just see how I get along with it.
I have a shitty summer cold, yes, in September, so we're gonna have to make do with how my voice sounds at the moment. I finished The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I want to say yesterday, could have been the day before. I had a really good time with this one. Now, I did say as I went in, it was a little bit of an anomaly in that I knew of the story. I had seen the film, so I was somewhat familiar with the things that would be happening in it. But there were a couple of things that surprised me. There was a whole lot more focus on the battle scene in the book than there was on the film. And I think that that might have been so that we didn't terrify little children who went to the cinema just to see a film about a talking lion. I also felt like there was a little bit more inclusion of the beavers and of the other animals that were in the story than there would have been in the film. But I'm not talking about the film here. I'm talking about the book and the time that I had with it. And I genuinely really enjoyed this one. I felt like the writing would be a little bit out of my reach because it is a classical story, because it was written about 60 or so years ago. And I felt like the writing would be way too flowery. It would be something I wouldn't understand. And I was really impressed with not just how it was written, but also how I connected with this book. It didn't feel in any way alienating. It didn't feel in any way too flowery or too much for me. I actually feel it was written in quite a timeless way. It is a little bit grand, is how I would put it. It's a little bit kind of flowery at times. But I think that that is just mirroring what writing standards were like at the time. I don't know if I'm going to continue on with the series. As I said, this is the second one of the series that I would have read by now. I think I will give it I might pick one up in the future, but it's not going to be an immediate priority for me. But where does it fall into the scale? If I was being realistic about it, when I was trying to put it into the boxes of where did I enjoy this, more than, less than, it actually comes in third place. Because I enjoyed it much more than I did The Housekeeper and the Professor, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I did Savage Her Reply. I did not think that a mythology book would be up there so high, but classics are really on its tail, believe me. So that's September done and dusted. October is the entire reason that I put this video together in the first place. I am absolutely not a reader of the genre that's going to come up in October, so I really need to sit down, look at my bookshelf, look at all of the options that are available to me, do a little bit of research, talk to a couple of friends, and have a think about what book it is that I want to go for. October, the spookiest of all the season. Obviously, I'm going to go horror, but I am going relatively young horror. I am going to try, and I genuinely mean try, You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kaylin Byron, which I have often called You Weren't Supposed to Die Tonight. So if I get that kind of malapropism, work with me here. So this is about Chastity, who is working at a summer camp that basically reenacts a really famous and cult horror movie from the 1980s, where you have the slasher, you have all of the victims, you have the final girl, which is Chastity herself, and there's going to be a kind of, this is much more real life than we expected it to be situation. I am buddy reading this with a couple of friends of mine because I kind of knew that was the only way that I was going to do this. And I'm also going in with the pretense that isn't technically a pretense because it is actually the way it's going to be, of this being one of the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge prompts. It's to read a horror book that is by a BIPOC author, and Kaylin Byron is a black woman. I'm so intrigued to how I'm going to take this on. Horror is not my thing. I don't think it's going to be very gory. I hope it's not going to be super gory. I hope it's not going to be like guts escaping from body. I want something more psychological horror than I want body horror. Because I have been watching quite a lot of horror stuff recently. I've been watching a lot of The Haunting of Hill House. I have been watching Midnight Mass. I am currently in the middle of Bly Manor. And those are very psychological horror. So that is okay with me. I haven't seen anybody's guts escape from their stomach, so that's fine. But I think the second that somebody starts ripping heads off or disemboweling people, we're probably going to have a bit of a problem. But I'm going to go into it with the most pure of intentions, and I am really going to give this the best chance that I can give it, and let's see how I get on. In case you can't tell, I am so scared of this.
Couple of days later, I am finished with You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight. Horror is definitely not going at the top of the table. I had a couple of qualms about this book, and I feel like Jess and Margaret had similar qualms to me, and it is that this book kind of felt like it was a slasher for so much of it, but you don't actually see any dead bodies until well into the 70%, and that is way too late for your first dead body to be showing up. There were also a couple of things that just didn't add up. There were a couple of things that were too obvious. I didn't really think that this book needed the epilogue that it had. There was an entire storyline that fed into the epilogue that, to be honest, we could have closed up in that last chapter. We could have just finished the story here. As for the actual horror elements themselves, how did I get on with it? It was graphic in places. And there were even a couple of times that Margaret said to me, this is a specific trigger for you and you need to skip from this paragraph for a couple of pages, which I did do. And I was so thankful that she had done that because it was a really specific trigger to me that I don't enjoy reading. But horror is not one that I'm going to go back to because I know that that kind of trigger is going to show up again, because I know that that kind of horror specifically, kind of things like body horror, not my thing. Psychological horror I would be much more on board with. But let's rank this one. So horror was never going to come at the top of the list, but I don't think it's necessarily straight at the bottom. Because there are a couple of books right down at the bottom of the queue that I didn't particularly enjoy. I really didn't love the mystery book that I picked up. I really didn't love the sci-fi book that I picked up. I didn't even finish it. And I really didn't love the thriller book, surprisingly, that I picked up. I actually think that I preferred You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight than I did the thriller book that I read, which is strange. So I'm putting it in fourth to last place. Who knows if that's where it's going to stay, because there's 2 more books and 2 more months that we need to fill out. But as of now, it is looking at fourth to bottom. For November, there is a very specific monthly kind of challenge that people will set themselves. And you can bet that that's what I'm going to be setting myself to. November was only ever going to go one way for this, and that is nonfiction. There is, however, a slight caveat. I already read a lot of nonfiction. I already enjoy a lot of nonfiction. So I've decided to go for a branch of nonfiction that I don't generally tend to reach for. A lot of the nonfiction that I will go for is a celebrity memoir, is a recollection of pop culture that I've really enjoyed. For example, I've read a lot of books about Friends. I've read a lot of books about Schitt's Creek. I've read a couple of books by Jonathan Van Ness. Now it feels appropriate to try something that I haven't tried a lot of, but have intended to try a lot of, and that is a self-help book. It's a book that's kind of going to get my life back on track, help bring me back to an area where I would like to be in terms of my life, in terms of my physical and my mental health. So I'm going to go for Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. I've been recommended this book a couple of times. I've been specifically recommended it when I did a personal training course back in 2020 when I wanted to get my sleeping patterns, my eating patterns, and my exercise patterns back on track. But I didn't read the book. I did the other two things. I kind of got my exercise worked out, and I've kind of gotten my relationship with food a little bit improved. But I never really took a look at how I was sleeping, and I never really took a look at the science behind that. But now might be a good time. So I'm going to go into it with an open mind, and I'm going to hope that it's going to clean up my sleep routine a little bit more. Let's talk about Why We Sleep, the book, not the biological concept, because I'm pretty sure we're all good on that part. I don't think this is the book for me. I don't think that this is the one I should have gone with, for the simple reason that it's too bulky. It's got way too much information. It's got a little bit of kind of anxiety inducing information about, oh, you should be sleeping this amount of hours every single night. You should be making sure that this is what your bedroom is like. You should be making sure that this is what your routine is like for the 4 hours before you go to sleep, or for 2 hours before you go to sleep. And I do try. I have really tried to improve my sleep hygiene over the last couple of weeks. Externally to this book, I have tried not to be on my phone as much. I have tried to limit the screen time for about an hour before I go to bed. I have tried to replace the doom scrolling with knitting or with being on my Kindle, rather than staring into this tiny little speck of blue light that is shining straight into my eyeballs. There was just something about this book that didn't work for me. I think it was too heavy. I think it was too informative, if that's a bad thing to be. I think there was just too much going on at times that I just needed a little bit of a break from it. At the beginning of this book, Matthew Walker had a really great author's note where he was like, you can dip into this book now and then. It is not the kind of book that you need to read constantly. You don't need to be reading it all the time. And I actually think that that is probably the way that I'm going to go about this book. Because as of now, I am not for nowing it. I'm on part 2 or 3, and I'm going to come back to it, and I'm going to keep reading it, and I'm going to figure out what it is that I like about it, and then I'll return to it. Where's it go in the ranking? Great question. I've put it into 8th place at the moment. That is unlikely to change, but could. There's one book left to go here. There is one genre left to go here. And this one is a bit of a shot in the dark. This is not what you would expect from a December reading, because you're expecting lightness, you're expecting fluffiness, you're expecting all of the vibes of Christmas. That's not where we're going here. So here we are, into the final month of this mayhem and madness. December, we're going to go for something a little bit off kilter. You would be expecting me to go with like a happy, cozy romance book. I'm going with crime. In a lot of countries across the world, there are gifts given out for the various religious celebrations that happen in December. And because people will start to stockpile these presents around October or November, it's starting to feel like, there are a huge amount of break-ins that happen in December. So for that really strange reason, it felt like it was obvious to correlate December and crime for this thing. So I am going with, hopefully, the book that is going to send me out on a high for this, and that is The Christmas Appeal by Janice Hallett. I read The Appeal back in April of 2022, and I was obsessed with it. I took a little time after work one day and I said, you know what, I'm going to just read about 100 pages of this, 50 to 100, and I'll see what the vibe of it is, and then I'll go and I'll make dinner, or I'll like watch TV for the evening. I did none of that. I sat on my chair for 6 hours straight. I only got up to go to the bathroom or to get water or to like get the takeaway that I had ordered, because I did not want to do anything but read The Appeal. The Christmas Appeal is obviously set around Christmas, and it's focusing on a pantomime. That's one of my favourite traditions of a British and Irish Christmas. You go with your family and you watch a pantomime of Jack and the Beanstalk or Cinderella or Aladdin. I even took part in some of them as like the children's chorus when I was younger. So I'm hoping that that's going to send me absolutely screaming back to when I was a child. But I feel like this is also a continuation of The Appeal, in that it's set in the same town, it's got the exact same characters in it, including Femi and Charlotte, who are the two law students that were kind of tasked with figuring out what was happening in the appeal, they're back here for the Christmas appeal to figure out what's happening during the pantomime. Because I had such a great time with the appeal, I am hopeful. But also, Janice and I have had a bit of a falling out. I didn't love The Mysterious Case of the Alfreton Angels. I think I gave that about 3 stars. Now, it is told in the exact same way. It is told with letters, it is told with email exchanges, it is told with transcripts of phone calls or text messages, and I really love that method of storytelling. It feels very kind of linear. It really grabs you and keeps you in, but also it feels like there is no natural stop to the story. It feels like there is no natural place for you to stop and say, okay, I'm only going to read one more chapter before I go to bed, or I'm only going to read one more chapter before I walk the dog, or whatever it is. With a book like this, it doesn't feel like you can just stop. So that's what I'm a little bit concerned about. This evening after work, I am once again going to sit on the exact same chair, which is over there behind this wall, and I'm going to do hopefully the exact same thing, which is just get engrossed into this little book. It's only about 187 pages. I'm going to hopefully get so engrossed in this book that I'll be back with you tomorrow morning to tell you exactly what happened.
Clearly not the next day. I'm not going to insult you by saying that it is. I have different hair. I look like a different person. But I did eventually finish the book. It did take me a little bit longer than I think I was expecting. It took me across 2 days rather than just the one chunk that I was expecting this to take, because it's a really short book. I think it is only about 180, 190 pages. So it's like I will fly through that in an afternoon. And I did fly through most of it in an afternoon. So I wasn't 100% off with my prediction there. I really enjoyed this one. It brought us right back to the camaraderie of the fairway players. It brought us right back to all of the intensity and all of the one-upness, especially because the main people in the first book are no longer here in the second book. I'm not entirely sure why. It might be explained at the end of the appeal, but I have just completely forgotten that or blocked it out. I had a really great time with this one. It did bring me back to the whole intensity of doing a panto, going for rehearsals, learning your lines, learning the choreography. It was weird that the panto only took place on one day. There was one performance. I thought it would be stretched out a little bit more. And I was a little bit surprised with what ended up happening. I was a little bit surprised with how it had been taken and how it had evolved from, oh, we think it's this person, to it's actually this person, and this is the reason why it all happened. And you think it's because of this, but it's actually because of this. This actually went into first place on the board. And it's a very well deserving first place because it hooked me the entire time that I was reading it. There was times that I wasn't reading it that I was thinking about it, that I was trying to get back into the book, that I stayed up until 1 o'clock in the morning again, getting as much of it read as I could. Now that we have got crime into the ranking, we have got the final ranking for the entire 12 genres that I have been reading this year. The podium places are going to crime, historical fiction, and mythology. And I am very surprised that mythology has gotten in there. Historical fiction, I kind of hummed and hawed about it for a lot of the year when I ended up having it in first place for so long. I hummed and hawed about it because I didn't think it would make sense to have a book that I didn't even finish into first place. But then I thought about why it was that I had put it into first place. Okay, I didn't really enjoy the book, but I did enjoy the aspect of being back in the 80s. I did enjoy being back in such a time zone. So putting it into second place eventually does kind of make sense. The places from 4th to 12th are all being taken up by classical fiction, literary fiction, fantasy, dark academia, horror, non-fiction, thriller, sci-fi, and mystery. There are a couple of those that are surprising me. And let me tell you why they're surprising me. When I put this idea together at the start of January, I put together a prediction. I had a thought about how this was going to go. I had an idea as to where the genres would fall in the rankings. So on the left, you can see what my predictions were at the start of 2024. And on the right, you can see what the actual lineup looked like. There is only one that is completely correct in both lists, and that is sci-fi. I knew that that wasn't going to be a thing for me. It wasn't really. And that's the only one that I was in any way correct about. The rest of them, I have been completely surprised. And so, much like Boys to Men, we have come to the end of the road. And I'm trying to think if there's anything that I have learned from this specifically. And I think one of the main things that I've taken away from it is not to discredit books just because of their genre, because there's some genres in here that I didn't expect to have gone so well. I really didn't expect mythology to have come into third place. And I think that that is because I connected with the mythology of it so much. I picked one that I knew was going to work for me. And I think as well, it's to pick books in the genres that I know will work for me rather than to pick a book just because it is in that genre. Take a look at nonfiction, for example. I love reading nonfiction books. I absolutely have chocked full shelves with it. But the one that I chose for this did me so dirty that I ended up putting it into ninth place. That wouldn't have in any way associated with where I thought it was going to go, because in the original I thought it was going to go into third place. That's a huge drop of 6 places just because the book that I had chosen wasn't something that I was enjoying. What ranking or what genre that I read or what book that I read surprised you the most by how I had reacted to it, or that you just never thought it was something that I was going to reach for? If you have stayed the entire way through this little experiment, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope that you have had as much fun watching this as I have had putting it together. If you'd love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me a calendar emoji, because we've been doing this for an entire year. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.